All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Container Gardening, a virtual class brought to you by the City of Mansfield, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service, and Tarrant Regional Water District. Before I introduce our speaker and we begin, I'm going to tell you a little bit about TRWD. So this presentation is supported by our regional water supplier, Tarrant Regional Water District. TRWD maintains 4 area lakes and the pipelines needed to provide surface water to local water treatment plants. Those local water treatment plants then clean the water to drinking water standards, and then they provide it to our communities. TRWD also works with many cities in Tarrant County, such as Fort Worth, Arlington, and Mansfield, to provide water conservation programs to the community. And this online class is a partnership with the City of Mansfield Water Utilities. Conservation is an important water supply strategy to help meet the needs of a growing population, and so that's why TRWD supports many programs that help save water through outdoor watering and gardening education. If you go to savetarrantwater.com, you can sign up for free weekly watering advice that's custom to your location, where you'll get every Monday either an email or a text message letting you know how much your lawn needs to be watered that week based on the weather. If you are a resident of Tarrant County, you can also sign up for a free sprinkler check, where a licensed irrigator will come to your home and provide you with a comprehensive evaluation of your sprinkler system and any recommendations to reduce water waste. There's also an event calendar on savetarrantwater.com where you can find information about future classes and workshops just like this one. And then TRWD also partners with other organizations such as the Tarrant County Master Gardeners and Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service to provide educational programs like this one. So now that I've talked a little bit about TRWD, I'm going to go ahead and start the program. Our speaker today is Steve Cheney. He's a Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service agent and a horticulture expert. Today he's going to talk to us about container gardening. All right, so Steve, I'm going to go ahead and switch it over to you if you want to go ahead and start sharing your presentation.
All righty, well, thank you. Okay, let's see, what can we do here? All right, hopefully everybody can see that. Can everybody see it? All right, well, we're going to talk a little bit about container gardening due to all of the things that are going on right now with the COVID and the stay at home. Everybody's been taking up gardening again, which is great. The only downside to it is that they're making my phones ring off the wall with questions about gardening. So, but that's good. I'm glad to hear that. Anyway, as she said, my name is Steve Cheney. I'm the extension horticulturist. I've been with them quite some time. I enjoy gardening, and it's been a lot of fun. And I'm not the most IT person in the world, but we're learning, so hopefully it'll go smooth. Anyway, that's my little friend, container gardening pal, made out of old clay pots. I always thought he was kind of fun. All right, why container gardening? You know, there's lots of ways and lots of reasons to do it, but the main one is a limited space, or maybe you have an unsuitable area to grow things in. You know, too much shade, too much sun, whatever it may be, poor soil, concrete, you know, condo, zero lot line, whatever it may be. Maybe you have limited time or resources and don't have the time to have a great big half-acre garden, and that's great too. Accessible gardening, I know as I get a little more mature, it's a little harder for me to get out there and garden, so accessible gardening is really important, and it's flexible. You can do all kinds of things with container gardening. Space needed, you might just do it on a windowsill inside with maybe some herbs that you're cooking with. Maybe just out on a patio if you're in an apartment or a condo. Maybe on a balcony. Maybe just out on your doorstep. The neat thing about containers on a doorstep is that you can have a whole bunch of them out there. Next month, you can rearrange them and put them on different sides and put them up on bricks and hang them and do various different things. The next month, you can put them on the back porch and bring all the back porch out to the front porch. So there's really a lot of different leeway about that. Location requirements, for the most part, we need a lot of sun. For most of your bedding plants, you need a minimum of 6 hours of full sun. Vegetables, 8 to 10 hours of full sun. That may be tough, so you just kind of have to see what you can do. And most importantly, close to a water source. Nobody wants to drag tons of hoses or go back and forth in the house with a little bitty tiny watering can. So you want to make it easier for you. Containers come in lots of different shapes and sizes. It needs adequate drainage. Never held toxic material, both to people and plants, is very important. If any of you have been around a few days, you might recognize that. That's one of those old Samsonite suitcases. I found that in a garage sale for $1 a long time ago. Bought it, drilled a few holes in the bottom, and it made wonderful basket or a wonderful container. The neat thing about it is when you're tired of it, you just close it up and pack it away and go on to the next place. Anyway, this idea there. Containers also need room for roots and obviously mobile, right? You get that? That's the bad thing about doing it online. You can't see people's reaction. You don't know if they're laughing or frowning or going, huh? So anyway, the bicycle was kind of a fun mobile thing, I thought. Different kinds of containers. People a lot of times will ask the differences between terracotta and concrete and all those things. So, most of what you see out there, you're going to see some glazed ceramic. A lot of it's made in China, Vietnam, that area. It's high fired, it's durable, and has a rainbow of colors. It's really pretty and really attractive outside on your porches. The old-fashioned kind is a terracotta, original burnt orange pot made from fired clay. It's very porous, excellent for drainage, but you got to be careful. And outside, it can either get a heavy freeze, can crack. Concrete used around public buildings. It gives formal homes because of durability. Some people have some old iron pots. It provides an old world look, a long life, but it's very heavy to try to pick up and move. And then lots of unusual containers. That's what I like to do, the bicycle and the suitcase, and you'll see a few more when we get into this presentation. But make sure they have drainage and let your imagination run rampant. So here's some imagination: flower pots, ceramic pots, window boxes, gallon cans, drums, barrels, gutters, hanging baskets, baskets with plastic lining, buckets, trash cans, shoes, bathroom fixtures. Be careful; it may not fit in your HOA though. So here's an old car. There was a junk car, and so they just decided that was a great container, and filled it full of interesting plants. Anything works as long as you can have some drainage and put some water in it. From when I was a kid, everybody used old whiskey barrels, cut them in half, and you could find them at every hardware store and all those kinds of things. And they did wonderful. Eventually they rotted out, but it was a great container. Chimney flues are fun. Used to see those all the time when, as people were building in new houses, and then they would get all these chimney flues and they'd cut them to fit, and then they'd have all kinds of pieces left. You could go by and say, hey, can I have those, from the builder, and say, can I have those things before you throw them away? And they said, sure. So you could paint them, you could stain them, you could stucco them. They were tall cylinders. Most of them were kind of square. Some had holes in them. They were really fun. But now, after a while, people caught on to it, and they knew people were using them, so that you go by and ask, and they said, yeah, you can have them for $25, $30, $40, whatever it may be. So not quite as fun anymore, but to have an upright container like that can really be an interesting idea. Hanging baskets, all kinds of hanging baskets. The more you can hang, the more fun you have. One of the neat things that a lot of people don't think about is you have very little insect issues on a hanging basket. And people say, well, why? Well, if you hang it up, it's way up in the air, and so if the insects are on it, then they're very open to their predators of birds and other things like that, as opposed to being on the ground. So you'll find very few insects way up in the air like that, and you'll have a lot less disease because you get good airflow. Window boxes are fun. I love this picture. I've used it for years, and usually when we are presenting live to people, where you can see them, you know, I ask them, okay, do you think is that really a window box or what? Or is it something else? People say, well, look at you and they say, funny, okay, what? Well, it is a window box on the side of a shed, and an artist painted that window. So that's painted, it's not even a real window. It's really, I thought it was fantastic. And then they just created a window box underneath it, you know, obviously real flowers too, by the way. Even regular old pots, you know, plastic ones or ceramic ones or whatever, you know, they can be fun because they can get all kinds of colors. You can change them out quickly, inexpensive, and just have some fun. Ornamental grasses, nothing like fun ornamental grasses and a big toad like that. A big toad can really be a fun container to get some people's attention. Here's one. I thought this was really neat. Those are iron containers, the big tall white ones. They painted them white because that way they really stood out in the shade and in the sun. They're tall. They give you all kinds of interesting looks. But in a minute, you'll see there's the same one, but in a dark color, and it's almost a silver. The reason they did that because it's more in the shade and it's real close to the water, so it reflects the water. There's some more of the water there, some of the containers in the water, which is a neat thing. Or you can have them on the outside of the water. You can have wispy, you can have color, you can have all kinds of neat, fun things. This was we talked earlier about concrete for commercial things. This is an interesting bed. This was at the Ball Seed Company in Chicago. And they had a big flat several acres where they did a lot of presentations. And one day Mrs. Ball came out and she said, you know, I'm tired of looking at flat areas. I want some interesting containers. So they brought all these in and built them and made huge berms, and it just turned out gorgeous. There's some other more interesting pots. And we'll talk in a minute, you'll know a little bit more about it, but if you've ever heard the thriller, the filler, and the spiller, here's the top coming out of the top. You can see the thriller. I hope you can see my cursor. And then you got the filler going in the side, and then you got the spiller coming out. So just remember when you're doing a big pot, thriller, filler, and spiller. There's some all kinds of more little interesting pots, you know, different sizes, different textures, different colors. You know, and again, it doesn't all have to be flowering. It can be the texture of the leaf, such as some of those mustards and different things. They can actually be really pretty gorgeous. All right, this was in Iowa. I found this at Iowa State. I thought it was really interesting. They were during their recycling year, so they made containers out of recycled material, and that was a part of a car, you know, with mufflers sticking up. You know, kind of interesting with some, you know, some hubcaps. Not everybody, and again, check your HOA. And here's one where they took some trucks. Well, you know, they got a truck bed. It's the ideal container. And they took the engine out of it and filled the engine compartment up with stuff, and it made it really neat. I loved it so much. I took several pictures of it, some close-ups, but, you know, hey, it's interesting, isn't it? They have a smaller container there. All right, this was, I kind of thought was really neat. You know, a lot of times when this was at a wedding, and where the bride and groom came in, and it was a really neat arch out there, but it was just kind of bare. You know, there was no color. It was all, you know, just kind of not too interesting. So they simply put out a couple of pots out there with some color, and it draws your eye right to it. So sometimes that's the neat thing about color and the neat thing about containers. The vertical gardening, I don't know if any of you have ever thought about it or seen that. It's a real interesting way to grow on the side of a building or the side of a wall. That's simply some 2x6s in the back, and they nailed them together to make a frame, and he put some chicken wire in there, put a little bit of landscape fabric behind it to keep the soil from falling out, and then they planted directly in it. Now they're behind it, there's an irrigation system that irrigates it, but you know, hey, it's a vertical garden. It's a wonderful container, something unusual. Here's some interesting, there's some chimney flues, there's a raised bed, there's some broken pottery, there's some pottery that's laying on its side. You know, obviously it's at a retail establishment, but I thought it was some kind of an interesting way of looking at things. Get out in the country a little bit. This is, I don't know if any of you are familiar over by Tyler, Blue Moon Nursery. This was a place they had there, and they had that little figure setting up, and then they had a bathtub back there. And you know, so it's kind of interesting, you know, not everybody wants a bathtub or has a place for a bathtub, but you know, it's kind of different. There's another big frog. It's got some interesting plant material in that. You know, and that can be a fun. That was furnished by Weston Gardens, by the way, and that was at Mayfest a few years ago. And I always thought that was a wonderful container. And you know, everybody that walked by during Mayfest, that always caught their attention. Your porch, again, you may want some interesting things. It may be herbs. All of those things that are in that picture are all edible. You may just want to accent pieces to, again, with the thriller and the spillers and the fillers, something just to accent a wall or accent a walkway or something. This is a neat patio in Arizona. I thought it was kind of fun. So they use great big huge plants. But they also had some hanging baskets, and they had some things growing up and going up through the arbor. They're around a outdoor fireplace, you know, some smaller things that are manicured, not a lot of color, but, you know, some interesting containers. And, you know, and they had to throw the pet dog in there too, just to have some fun. This is in a small little courtyard. They wanted something, you know, it was tall, bare walls, and so they put in some trees actually in some large containers, had a nice little seating area there, and so they made it a very exclusive little private garden, which that really is a fun way of doing it. And the only way you can do it is with containers when you don't have anything planted in the ground. Here's some succulents. Everybody's doing succulents these days. There are so many of them out there, and they're just absolutely gorgeous. The biggest thing you got to remember is if you're planting succulents outside, or if you're putting them in containers outside, you may have to bring them in during a heavy winter, because they will just melt in, or if they get really heavily frozen. But you know, keep them in smaller containers. They're easy to bring in. This is always the one where I get people to guess what that is. It's a container, you know, and they just pruned it, but it's, you know, it's interesting because it's wheat. You know, it's planted solid full of wheat, and so it's coming up, and then they just pruned it off at various different levels to kind of give some texture and to give a different look to it. I think it's kind of interesting. There's some more different ones with some flues and some other pots. There's some with fennel, so that you can actually harvest it and eat it. And then if you just absolutely want a really low maintenance pot that you don't have to do much with, then there's a little bitty water garden. It's just a pot that you fill full of water and put water plants in it. Drop a mosquito dunk in there once a month. Keep adding a little bit of water to it, and you've got an instant water feature, an instant water garden, all in a simple small container. Anything goes. You know, this is another one of my garage sale finds. Just an old pair of, galoshes. They were for $1. So you drill a couple holes in the bottom, fill it full of different plants, and you got some instant pots that are easy to move. Got to keep an eye on them so they don't walk away though. Here's a wicker bassinet, another garage sale find that I thought was interesting, and they pulled all kinds of neat, fun, plants in there. This is for a gentleman that had needed some help. So he needed an enabling garden to make it more accessible for him. So he wanted a combination of a water feature and some container gardening. So he had this built. He can do it, easy, and he's got a little bit of all of it there. So, anything is possible. Just your imagination's your only limit. Here's some more fun pots. Herbs in containers. Again, you may just want an herb garden, and you may not have any place to put it, so it may all be in containers, and that can be fun. Here's a local garden, and they took out all of the grass. There's not a single blade of grass in there. Obviously, the age-old container, which is a bonsai. That's an interesting plant. That's at that time it was a 150-year-old tree. So that was probably 25 years ago. So it's probably 175, 180-year-old tree now that they put in a bonsai and kept it alive and kept it growing. And it's a wonderful hobby. It's a wonderful practice. And to some people, it becomes much, much more than that. If you go out, this is out in San Angelo, and they loved agave. They had terrible soil, so they just decided to have an agave and cactus container garden. And that can be fun. So you're not limited to edibles or to pretty flowers or whatever. Imagination is your only limit. This is in a downtown area. Any of you that might be able to guess, we always try to have a little guessing game here to see if anybody can recognize it, but it's in downtown Chicago. And they had these nice long beds along the main street there. Can't think of now the name of the street, but it's a big famous street. And nobody would pay any attention to them. They threw trash in them and they did all kinds of things. So then they changed them out and put water features in there. I thought that was kind of interesting. It's not really a container, but the whole entire bed is a raised container. So I just thought I'd throw it in there for fun. Here's, some different looks of it, and people really stopped and appreciated it, and they quit throwing trash in it and really started taking a lot of pictures of it. So containers can be a lot of different things. They can be porous, clay or wood, but they dry out a little bit faster. If it's a non-porous container, such as plastic or ceramic, they retain water a little easier. Metal or dark pots retain heat, so they'll use up a little water a little quicker. And small pots versus large pots as far as what type of plants you can put in them. And there's another one of my garage sale finds, little children's galoshes. But growing media, that's always important. You want as light a weight growing media as possible. We call it growing media as opposed to a lot of the nurseries and box stores that call it potting soil, because in the majority of it, there actually is no soil in there. It is actually a growing media, a man-made growing media that is lightweight, that drains well, and doesn't keep it, causing issues. But it will hold a little moisture. It needs to drain well, and it needs to be disease and weed free. Potting mixes are readily available. You can mix them out of peat moss. You can mix your own out of perlite, vermiculite, sawdust, wood chips, and just about anything else that you want to do. It just all depends on what you like. Some of those are maybe going, the perlite and the vermiculite may go away one of these days because of the dust that it creates, and people need to wear a mask when working with that. So the EPA has been talking about that, but we'll see. Compost. Garden soil is often too heavy, so you want to be careful that you don't put garden soil in your pots. Plants, you can do annuals, you can do perennials, you can do shrubs, you can do vegetables, you can do fruit, you can do herbs. Again, the sky's your limit on what you do and what kind of extra yard art that you put in there and whatever you do to make it fun for you. The plants, you need to make sure the right plant at the right place, sun versus shade. You know, we get a lot of sun in north central Texas, and so if it's going to be out in full sun, you need to make sure it's hardy enough, or as it should be in the shade or partial shade or whatever it may be. The size, obviously, if you got a little bitty tiny container, you don't want a great big tree. Vice versa, you don't want a little bitty tiny plant in a huge container. Match the light and the moisture requirements. You know what it needs. Similar growth rate when you're putting the plants in, because you don't want you don't want a cactus in with a vine that just grows overnight. Use varieties as far as vegetables that are made for containers, such as the patio, pixie, tiny Tim, all of the little small tomatoes. Design principles are important to remember, and that's the focus, the balance, the form, the texture, the rhythm, the proportion, and the color. Focus is what draws your eye first. Is it the yellow? Is it the black? Is it the white in there? What draws your eye first? You want to place it right below the tallest point. You know, and different people will think different things. Some people say it's the black that draws your eye first. Some people think it's the yellow that draws your eye first. But the tallest point is the white, and so that you're planting a little bit below that. You create texture, color, form, so that everything kind of fits together. Balance is stability, and kind of goes along with that wheelbarrow. You know, they're not quite as stable if you're not careful. Symmetrical or asymmetrical, and the same visual weight. Form, again, the thriller, the filler, the spiller is the line, the mass, the filler, the cascading part of it. You know, that just completes a pot. You know, lots of interesting things there, and no matter what time of day or when you're looking at it, it captures your attention. Ideally, we want to use 3 to 5 different textures, depending on the size of the container. If you get too many more, it gets too busy, and you spend all your time going, oh, what's that? What's this? What's that? If you got 3 to 5, you identify them real quickly, and you can enjoy them. Again, you want something that's a little bit coarse. You want something maybe a little bit medium, and then something a little bit of fine texture. And rhythm is just repeating color, form, or texture, so that everything kind of fits together. You don't want to have, you know, every single thing being different, because then it just, you know, boom, 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 and, you know, and you get lost sometimes. Proportion is important to match your plant size to the container size. You know, the plant's a little bit small for that container, but hey, it's a container and it works. So it all depends on what you want to do. Tips: mix plants with at least 3 textures. Use plants with interesting foliage, varying your colors, your textures, your shapes, your sizes. Use plants with interesting flower shapes that catch your eye. And some may need trimming, some may need a little bit of deadheading, or some you may just have to reach in and pull it out and replace that plant. But that's easy to do. Watering, check soil moisture. You can need it, you know, some people need a moisture meter to make it work because they're just not comfortable enough judging. But basically you want to go 1 inch below the surface of the pot to see if there's any moisture there. So that's usually, a lot of people, unless you got a real fancy manicure, will just use your finger, your index finger, and go down to the first joint. And if you don't feel any moisture, then it's time to give it a drink. You want good drainage, so in case it rains or in case something happens, this is not sitting there in water, because that, overwatering, underwatering problems are the biggest issues that we have with container plants, and sometimes the symptoms are very similar to each other. Leach pot once a week, that may be a little often depending on the pot, and for those of you not familiar with leaching, that's where you simply take the pot out, put it on grass or something where the water can run into, and just run it till it's completely full, and until the water is just rushing out the bottom. And that leaches out any salts. It leaches out any contaminants that might be in there. But most important is when you bring that container in for the winter, most of the insects that are out there lay their eggs in the soil to overwinter. And then, so if you bring a pot in the wintertime, and it comes in where it's moist and you've got some humidity and the temperature's controlled, then the eggs think, hey, it's time to hatch. So if you leach it 2 or 3 times before you bring it in, you'll drastically cut down the amount of insects you bring into the house. Always mulch them, and I always get a kick out of people that don't mulch. They mulch their flower beds, they mulch everything outside, but they don't mulch with containers. It's the same thing, same principle. And leave 1 to 3 inches at the top of a container if possible, so that your water has a place to go in. It's not just running off right away. Fertilization is always important. A compost or slow release fertilizers are going to be the best. Liquid fertilizer, it's easy to put too much on. If you put too much, then the plants grow real tall, real fast, real spindly, and then salts build up real quickly. If you don't do enough, then you got real slow growth, and your leaves often will start yellowing. Disease and insects, insect prior to planting, so that, if you go to hopefully you go to a good nursery and they've kept track of that, so there's no insects on there, but it's possible you could bring some insects home. So inspect them to make sure that they're healthy and disease and insect free. Manual removal is always good, unless you're real sheepish. And then water, spray, or soap are always going to be your first avenues of treatment before you pull out the heavy chemicals. All right, this is just for the people that don't understand your style of gardening. I always thought that was kind of interesting. Not everybody has the same sense of humor as I did, though. All right, questions and comments. That's the end of this talk. I wanted to keep it short and to the point. There's my number and my email. Feel free to give me a call at any time. Currently, like I said, due to COVID, we're working remotely and not in the office at all times, but have the phones all forwarded to me. So I will get your email, or I'll get your email and get your phone number, your phone as well. I may not get back to you at the moment, but that's what we have voicemail for. So hope that helped you to know a little bit about containers, and maybe answered a few questions and maybe stimulated your mind on what you can do with what you have, and maybe might even go find some new colorful ones, or maybe a suitcase or a bicycle. So thanks, and I'm going to turn it back over to Heather.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Steve. That was awesome. I think we have a lot of questions here, so I'm going to just go ahead and start asking you some questions. The first question is, what's the best time to grow hot peppers in North Texas?
You grow hot peppers 2 times a year. You plant them in the spring, so usually in April, and so they'll grow most of the summer. Then it gets too hot. They may get a little hot, they'll burn up, and then you can go again in the fall and create a fall crop. Most times in North Central Texas, the fall crop is vegetables is going to be better than the spring crop.
Okay, great. All right, let's see. Someone asked, how do you keep your hanging baskets from drying out so much?
They really don't dry out that much more. A lot of times, most people will hang a hanging basket kind of underneath a porch or an arbor, so it gets a little break from the sun. But you just got to check them a little more often. and because when you put them in and water them, if it's on the ground, then sometimes it'll help moderate the water use. If it's up in the air, then it'll leak out the bottom. So just have to check it just a little bit more often.
Okay. And it seems like a lot of people are having problems with, especially, here in Texas when it's so hot, their containers drying out fast. Do you just have any general tips on how to keep it, maybe like the soil medium, or just any tips on how to keep it wet?
There are lots of different ways. One of the big ones, like we talked about, is be sure you mulch them, and that helps hold a little bit of the moisture in. But there are a lot of really great soil crystals that you put mix in with your potting soil, that when the water hits it, it actually holds that water in there and kind of forms into like a little gel, and then slowly releases the water back out. So I always suggest looking at that. Some of the potting media has that already, but if not, get your small container of that and add a little bit and follow directions, add it to the soil.
Okay. And do you recommend having like a tray underneath and keeping like water in that tray?
Trays are important, because if you don't have them, obviously in the house you need them because, then it'll run out on your cabinets or your windowsills. But outside it's nice too, because if you don't, it can stain your deck or it can stain your concrete. It gives you a little bit of a place to hold a little additional water. Some of the containers are even made with reservoirs at the bottom. So instead of watering the soil, you actually fill up the reservoir at the bottom, and it pulls water up into the soil. So, they're kind of different things depending on what you're looking at. But yeah, trays are important.
Okay. And then someone's asking, what is the best practice for deadheading your flowers, and does it differ by plant? Where do you cut?
It does, but basically you're going to cut back to that first node right below the flower, and that's where the branch is coming up from, where the leaf comes out, and then it'll usually come right up above that and have a flower. So usually, if you can, cut it back to that first node. That'll help stimulate new growth. If you can't, some people just prune it right below the flower, just to get that spent bud off of there.
Okay. And what is your advice? What is your suggested growing media? I know that differs for different plants, but what do you like to use in your pots?
I make my own compost, so I usually just find a growing media. There's a couple commercial growing medias that we use in the greenhouse that I like. But something that's got a little bit of, if I'm going to mix it, something that's got a little bit of vermiculite, a little bit of perlite, a little bit of compost, and then a little bit of, chopped up bark, which it opens up the pores a little bit and allows the air and the water to get down in there a little bit.
Okay. And can you kind of walk us through the process of how you use soap to remove bugs from your container plants?
Soap is, like I said, the first thing you're always going to, if you have bugs on your plants, whether they be in containers or not, the first thing is to go put a high pressure nozzle on your hose and turn it on and just kind of beat the plant with the water pressure, and that'll knock most of them off. And people say, well, okay, it knocks them off. Aren't they going to come right back? Well, sure. But, you're going to knock them off, and then they're going to come back. You knock them off. They come back. You knock them off. They come back. And they're kind of like anybody else. After 2 or 3 times getting knocked off, they say, hey, I'm going next door. He doesn't even have a hose. And then if that doesn't work, then you might want to use, a hose-in sprayer that you put a couple drops of Dawn or something like that. And what happens is that soap creates a soapy residue. You spray it on there, and it gets on the insects, and the insects don't have any way to get that soapy residue off. And so on a lot of them, it just suffocates them. And so that's a quick, easy way, because the soap's not going to harm your plants, not going to harm your soil, and it's not going to harm your pets or anybody else. It just takes care of a lot of the classes of insects.
Okay. And when it comes to native plants or plants that are really super adapted to our hot weather, what are your favorites for containers?
Oh goodness, there's so many of them there. Um, whew. Now you put me kind of in a spot. There's a lot of them out there. For the spiller, there's frog fruit and several of the different ground covers that work really well for that. There are a lot of really good native salvias out there that are fun to garden with because they take so much. You can cut them back 2 or 3 times a year. And so, and there's a few native ornamental grasses that work. Depends on the size of the pot. So, you can't go wrong with a native plant, because it's more well adapted to our droughts and our temperatures. So just whatever you like works probably good.
Okay, great. And so, okay, someone is asking about combating high wind. So if you live maybe in a high rise, you're on a balcony and your plants are getting beat up by wind, do you have any way to combat that?
That's a good question. Sometimes depending on where it is, if it's a wrought iron balcony, that you might consider putting a small strip of shade cloth or a strip of freeze cloth or something along that allows some of all the sunlight to come through, but it will cut down a lot on the wind coming through. If you're hanging them, there's not a whole lot you can do in that aspect, but if you've got them down on the floor, either a bigger pot in front of them to help protect it or something like a shade cloth or freeze cloth.
Okay. Yeah, so basically try to place something that'll block the wind a little bit.
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Someone has an issue with getting mold growing on some of their pots, particularly terracotta pots. Is that an issue with too much moisture, or is there a way to combat that?
Generally, it would depend on where the mold's growing. If it's growing on the outside, that's just a little bit too much moisture. Terracotta does obviously retain a lot of moisture, and most of the time what you'll see is salt rings on it, the white rings that go around on the outside edges. And all you can really do is just periodically empty the pot out, sterilize it really good, and scrub it with a good soapy water and some brushes, and that'll usually get a lot of that off. But if you've got mold or something growing on the inside, then obviously you're watering way too much.
Okay. And can you talk a little bit about the mulching on the top? Is that mainly just like bark mulch, or are you talking about maybe putting some like gravel in the top, or?
It really all depends on what you want. I prefer in a pot to use a bark mulch simply for the fact it's lighter weight than putting rock. It will slowly break down into the soil and give you a slow release fertilizer over a period of time. And it tends overall to retain moisture a little better than the rock does. Although I've done some really neat containers where I've taken, and bought the aquarium rock and actually put the different colored aquarium rock and made some interesting shapes on top of the mulch. So that you get some additional color from that, and at the same time, it's just an additional mulch on top of the bark mulch.
Okay. All right, I think we've got time for about one more question.
All right, make it a good one.
Okay, so when you're actually potting the plant, is it better to keep the root ball intact, or do you want to like release some of the dirt around the roots and stuff?
That's a good question, and I'm sorry I didn't bring that up earlier. I always advise people when they go to a nursery if they find some things they like, to either ask somebody, or if they're comfortable doing it, turn the pot over on the side, squeeze it a little bit, pull out the plant gently, so that you're able to see if it's root bound or not. If it's root bound, obviously you're going to need to either cut, disturb, loosen some of that roots, or else it'll stay root bound when you replant it. But also you want to check to make sure that it wasn't just recently potted up, and so it wasn't a little bitty tiny plug that is in a big pot that hadn't had a chance to grow root structure yet. So just kind of look at it and see. Sometimes it's been in the pot too long and you have to cut it or tear it apart. But if it's, got a normal amount of roots, just loosen it up just a hair.
Okay, and some people are saying that they couldn't read on your slide the small phone number. Can you just verbally say your phone number?
817-884-1945. That's the office number. That's the receptionist, and she can take a message or forward it or send me an email or whatever it may be. So 817-884-1945.
Great. And so today, if we didn't get to any of your questions, or if you have like maybe a more in-depth question or something like that, then you can call Steve and get information straight from him. You can also go to savetarrantwater.com/ask, and you can submit any questions that you have there as well.
There you go.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Steve. And that was a lot of excellent information. Tons of information. I want to thank you again, and then also the City of Mansfield that provided this free opportunity for everyone. If you'd like to get notified of any future events like this one, you can sign up for our newsletter at savetarrantwater.com/sign-up, and we'll send you updates for all of our future events that are like this. Also, you can go check out our event calendar there at savetarrantwater.com/events. Our next free online event is going to be a care and repair DIY sprinkler class on June 25th with the City of Crowley, and you can check out more information about that on our event calendar. So Steve, thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome. Let us know if there's any other particular topic that you'd like to hear, and we'll see if we can't put one together for you.
Yeah, definitely. And after this, I'll send out a survey to everyone's emails that attended. So if you have any suggestions for future things that you'd like to hear about, definitely let us know. And thank you so much again, Steve, and the City of Mansfield for providing your time for us. And thank you all for joining us. Goodbye.
Goodbye.